I'm Chris Lee with Vandy Sports, here to talk a little bit about Clark Lea's press conference today and some things that were said. I'm not a big fan of press conferences, and in some ways, that may sound odd. I'm a member of the media. We do get some things out of them, but my philosophy is I'm not usually interested a lot of times in what you say, but what you do. But I think there were some things that were interesting today that Clark Lea said that made this one pop a little bit, and I'll get into those. And there's really about 4 or 5 things I want to speak about today that Clark Lea said. The first thing, and this was from a question that I asked him, how do you feel about your offensive play calling and philosophy so far? Are there any things that you'd like to change about that? And he said some very interesting things, and I think took responsibility and addressed some things maybe that have bugged the fans a little bit. So let's start here. He said a few things that worked a few weeks ago were the one-on-one matchups that they got in the Colorado State game, for instance. They won some matchups with Will Shepard and Chris Pierce. He talked about that. He said that in the Stanford game, they got some things going with motion that got the running game kick-started. So he said that those were things that really worked and helped them, and those are things I think a lot of us have seen and commented on, and basically he, I guess, is seeing those things too. He also said they do need to be more creative and to throw some more catchable balls, and again, those are things that a lot of us have seen. He said the play calling has got to unlock all those things, and that the confidence that the staff shows bleeds over into the players. I thought that was interesting too. But he basically said, I think that a lot of things that the coaches are doing are going to have to filter down to the players, and they send messages, I guess, through play calling and through whatever the players think they believe in them. But I heard a lot of things that indicated to me today that he's not really happy with the way the offense is run, and maybe some things are changing. And I think those are things that fans have been clamoring for. So sometimes coaches ignore problems and don't acknowledge them or criticize the media for asking the questions. I didn't hear that out of Clark Lea today. So if you want something encouraging, I guess, going out of the Georgia game, that was one thing. Here was another thing that I found interesting. I asked him about how he felt about the coaches and their job in terms of motivating players. And look, here's my take on things. If you're getting a scholarship to an SEC school and you're playing SEC football right there, that should be a lot of motivation. But we see what happens sometimes on the fields. Sometimes things don't always take for whatever reason. And he talked at length about that today. He opened and he didn't duck anything. He said it's absolutely the staff's job to get players motivated, said that football's fun, and in a perfect world, all these things manage themselves. But they don't, and we've seen it. And one thing that's really surprised me, I'm glad we got to go to preseason practices because I think people heard my take on this team before the year. I felt that they would be organized, they'd play with some passion and things like that. And so some things that I have seen in practice haven't surprised me. For instance, it's no shock that the offensive line has struggled, but some of those other things that we saw, just in terms of lack of spirit, lack of discipline, things like that, those did surprise me because they weren't consistent with what I saw in practice. And so Clark today said, yeah, that's the coach's stuff to manage. And really, here's where the disconnect is. And I asked it with the follow-up question. And by the way, I would watch the press conference yourself. I'm sort of paraphrasing to you guys what I saw, the notes I took in time as I watched it. And so his words may be a little different than what I'm communicating. And I thought his answers were long and drawn out and very thoughtful. And I would encourage you to watch those and not just take what I say as exactly what he said. But the point is just to summarize some things up and communicate some things quickly. And he said it's a psychological battle with players. And I think what he means by that, look, this is a team that did not win a game a year ago. 2 years ago, won, 2-3 games, whatever it was. The culture around that program has been awful. And he inherited that, and there's a lot of fires to put out in battles that they've got to manage that I don't think most people can fathom unless you really knew what's gone on with the team the last few years. But basically, he clarified that and this is my interpretation, that a lot of things have held the players back, that once they start losing, once things start going wrong, once the realities of the scoreboard start hitting home, that's when kids get down on themselves, lose confidence, lose motivation, those kind of things. So that kind of explains where things have fallen off between how they prepared them and how they've hit the field, which is totally understandable. That doesn't absolve the coaching staff. They get paid a lot of money to figure those things out. But I thought it was interesting, and his answer made sense to me. Now, he did single out some guys that he said played really well through adversity and continued to fight into games. And again, these are my words. His were a little different, but I asked him, can you single out some guys who you thought played pretty well and had that intensity? He said Quincy Skinner and Arrington Truesdale. Those were a couple. Those are both freshmen. So to me, that's a note. Those are some kids who are young kids. Obviously, they need better players. To me, if he's happy with those guys, those are two players that you might see get more playing time at some point. He mentioned 3 offensive linemen, Ben Cox, Julian Hernandez, and and Tyler Steen. And then he went to defensive backs, and he mentioned Brendan Harris, who's been getting really good grades on Pro Football Focus, and Max Worship. To the depth chart quickly, he noted a few things. Kickoff man Pearson Cook is back, so I guess he'll be handling that. So that's one of the few changes we've seen. Center this week, he's listing as either Julian Hernandez or Kevo Wesley. Kevo has not played very much. Hernandez also listed as the backup left guard. They've had some issues there, so it's interesting to see Julian, but listed at 2 spots, but certainly not the first time. Linebacker, some interesting things there. It continues to be Michael Owusu or DeRicky Wright listed in that order at 1 spot. C.J. Taylor has made his way onto the depth chart now. That's something I haven't expected. He's talked about his work on special teams, and they've been pleased with that. He, of course, is a really good local athlete that they signed, a kid who, frankly, didn't make a ton of impact in fall camp, but sometimes things change between camp. Once you get into the season, some players pop in practice that didn't in camp, and you're always watching for that. So C.J. Taylor was one of those guys. Anyway, that's my takeaway from what I saw in the press conference today that was notable. Again, I would encourage you to watch Clark Lea's press conference for yourself and hear his own words, because I think they're a whole lot more meaningful than my takeaways from those. You can check that out on a YouTube channel. That video is posted. And please, if you're watching this, subscribe to our YouTube channel. It really helps us out. It helps us get monetized and things like that. So if you're watching this and you would please hit the subscribe button, that helps us out a ton. I'm Chris Lee at Vandy Sports. We'll be back with more videos. Certainly we will have one after the UConn game, maybe some before, but at a minimum, Bruno Reagan and I will have the post-game show after Saturday's UConn game. So again, another reason to subscribe. You can get notified when we go live. Thanks for listening. I'm Chris Lee of Vandy Sports. We'll see you again very soon.